reporting has commenced.
I would like to open the Audit and Risk Committee meeting for the 6th of October 2020. It is 9:02 or 10:02. Sorry, got a clock in front of me. Firstly, I will just read through the civic affirmation. We gather today to duly and faithfully carry out our duties to the best of our judgment and ability for the advancement of this district and the benefit of all our community and fellow citizens. I'll also read out the acknowledgement of country. The Coorong District Council Audit and Risk Committee members acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the lands and waters and the Ngarrindjeri people whose ancestral lands are on which we meet today. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of Aboriginal people to country and pay our respects to elders past and present. We also extend that respect to all First Nation people. Firstly, just to welcome everyone to the meeting, we have staff in attendance.
Yes, we've got the Director of Corporate Organisation, Deb Brokenshire. We have Ben, who's the Manager of Human Services, Deb, Manager of Finance and Risk. Ash is taking minutes. Sean is the IT guru. And in the back we have Rob Allison, who is our risk staff member.
Okay. And present we have Councillor Tracy Hill, Councillor Sharon Bland, Councillor Glenys Taylor, and we have apologies from Councillor Lisa Roundtree. And we also welcome the Mayor in the audience.
Two other councillors.
And two other councillors. Welcome. Sorry. Councillor Lang and Councillor Arthur. I'm Michelle Bennett, the presiding member of the Audit Committee. Welcome. It's good to see a good turnout that we had some interested councillors. And also to David Pappas, who is the auditor from Bentley. Everyone's done? Okay. You don't confirm the appointment? Okay. So confirmation of minutes. So we are confirming the Audit and Risk Committee meeting minutes from the 2nd of June 2020. Is there any questions or issues in regards to the minutes? Okay, would someone like to put that motion forward? And you have to tell me the councillor's name, sorry. That was put by Councillor Hill, seconded by, I'm going to have to put my glasses on now because I can't see
the other way around. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Just give me a moment, sorry.
Councillor Bland moved, Councillor Hill seconded.
All right, so we have that moved by Councillor Bland, and we have that seconded by Councillor Hill. That the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on 2nd of June 2020 are received and noted. I'll put that to the vote. Sorry, can I see? Sorry, thank you. And that is passed. Thank you. Do you need to pass that unanimously? That's the process. Yes.
It is no.
Okay. So I would say that was carried unanimously. Okay. Next item on the agenda is item 5. Just the action list from previous meetings. Just to note that all those items are marked as complete, I think, at the moment, so there's nothing outstanding. Is that correct? Correct. Okay, so we'll move straight on to item 6, work schedule as at 25th of September 2020. I'll just read out the recommendation on this report that the Audit and Risk Committee receives a note the work program as at 25th September 2020. So I'll just ask first, if the officer wish to talk to the report. Okay, is there any questions or comments in regards to the report? Sorry, I'm just going through, just from myself, just a quick question on item 7. I guess, is there an update on the asset management plan?
So basically, the asset management plans are currently being reviewed and should be to us in the Feb meeting in regards to roads and CWS water and buildings.
Okay. So can I just ask, what's the process? Does this committee see the asset management plan sort of normally, I guess it gets workshopped with council, but usually before going to public consultation and all the rest of it, does it come back to this committee?
It'll go back to February, it'll be in February.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what don't know whether it's going into public consultation at this point, but it's only a review.
Okay.
But it will definitely be back here.
And I guess, is there any councillor in attendance? You've been looking at the asset management plan in council meetings or the infrastructure committee, I believe? And is there any members here that are on the infrastructure committee? Or is that the whole of council? Okay. And how's that progressed?
That's progressing quite well at the moment.
Yeah.
I think we're probably getting our head around all of the assets and infrastructure issues that are there.
Yeah.
Getting forward.
Okay. And so you feel like there's a good understanding of councillors in those briefings, that you're getting the information you need from staff and those sorts of things?
I believe so.
Cool. All right. If there is no other questions or statements in regards to that, would someone like to put that motion forward? Oh, okay. Now the CEO just highlighted just for members that the item 7.1, the first dot point, refers to the strategic management plan for 2021 and 25, and that's actually been renamed to the community vision plan. And so that information will be updated on the next work schedule for everyone. Okay. So would someone like to move the motion that the Audit and Risk Committee receives the notes of work program as at 26th September 2020? That's been put by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Bland. All those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 7. So this is the progress report from external auditors. And I do note that the attachment, I guess, with this item is actually, I think, attached with the financial statements. So just to make sure that everyone saw that, managed to read through that report. So just to tell you that the motion, the recommendation here is that the Audit and Risk Committee receive and note the report on audit findings undertaken by Bentley's SA for the year ending 30th of June 2020. So I guess we will ask to hear from the auditor. However, I'll just put it to the CEO if there's any other officer report in regards to this.
Just from my point of view, thank Bentley's for doing their work. I know that staff have a very good working relationship with David and his team, and work hard to make sure that we don't have outstanding items and that our finances are in the best shape that they can be. Judy, did you want to add anything?
No, I just thank you for doing something under COVID.
That's all right.
Okay, so David, are you happy to brief the council in regards to the audit findings?
Yes, certainly. Good news story this year is there's nothing significant to rate, which is quite a contrast to last year when we had some strong concerns over the long-term financial plan of the council, especially related to infrastructure renewals and the like, looking ahead. So, you know, there's been a few quite significant rate changes over the past few years, and that's now starting to come to fruition and show a good structure of finances for future infrastructure. So that's probably the biggest thing I really wanted to draw attention to. So it's not a finding for this year, but it is our look back at prior year issue. to give a bit of an update. So hopefully that was well picked up within our report. I'll give you that quick verbal on it as well. Great to see now a structure in the revaluation plan. So that there's some disciplines and structures that have come into the finance area, I would say, but I guess it's all about administration, but ends up in finance. These good disciplines are going to end up enabling you to have a better vision and planning for the future of the finance of the council. So yeah, a bit of a contrast to the prior few years where we've had a little bit of uncertainty in that long lens, but it seems to be coming to or heading into the right direction. So just a positive, I guess. Nothing else. I mean, certainly happy to talk about any of the points that are within our report. Yes, we did have the battle of the pandemic, COVID, but we've got technology solutions which made the audit process relatively simple, and it worked. In short, everything else seems to be, as I said, quite well. The only other risk that we raised in our report is in regards to WSB 16, which is the leases standard. There were no significant leases that came in, without getting into the jargon of the leasing standard. It's a very long, boring conversation, but we have had really good chats with management, and there is a bit of a heads up as to what to be wary of moving forwards when you embark on new contracts or arrangements. And we've had conversations at length in regards to the waste contract, making sure that the terms of your waste contract are structured in a certain way because you're about to embark on a new waste contract, is my understanding. And if the terms are structured the right way, it will have zero impact on the leasing standard. However, if it's structured a certain way, it will have an impact and you'll have to bring it to account. So just things to think about, but it's certainly not an issue at this point in time, but just a good open dialogue that we've had. But really, there's nothing else for me to report.
Is there any questions from any of the other members for the auditor while you have the opportunity?
Just through you, Michelle, to our auditor, in relation to the leasing, are we referring mostly under AASB 16 leasing for land, community land, or just in relation to equipment? What is it specifically, or is it encompassing all?
Yeah, it can be encompassing all, and whether it's something that's caught within the standard depends on the nuances of the arrangement. But anything which is an asset, very crudely, an asset where you have a right and control of use, and there is a contractual arrangement, yet it's not technically your asset, it needs to be considered under the leasing standard. So the in or out is very convoluted. It's probably one of the most controversial and complicated standards I've seen in a long time. But essentially it comes to when you have control of an asset, you need to consider that's not on your books. You need to consider, does it need to come on your books as a right of use asset? And community land is a tricky one.
I was just going to say, I can't quite see where community land still fits on the bit.
Yeah.
We can follow that up later.
Yes.
Interested in that. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments for the auditor? Just a question, and I did ask this at staff. I think your contract started 16-17 financial year, 17-18, 16-17. Just wondering, because I am new to the committee, how have you found the progression over the years with the audit, and I guess the way the organisation is heading in regards to both audit, I guess internal control, but also financial performance? Yeah,
great question. Early days when we arrived, there were issues and concerns over internal controls, and some of them quite business 101 basic internal controls. So to set the scene, effectively there was that uncertainty. A lot of our audit really had to consider the materiality of any financial discrepancy, and we do have the luxury of materiality, but there was certainly disconnects. But again, that was in the early days, all the way through to the report we provided today, which shows nothing, basically. It shows that there's been a really good evolution, I think, of the finance function, both from a function perspective and outcome perspective. And Judy in particular has been really good at working with us through what needs to be done and open dialogue, even throughout the year. We don't just wait for the audits, we'll drop an email or have a chat in between. And that has come to this point after 5 years of a clean management letter. So let that tell the story.
Yeah. Was there any areas of weakness that maybe didn't get to the point of hitting the report? And can I just say, there is nothing in the report, there is no findings in that sense, which normally we'd see something, at least in best practice or something, you know, that could need approval. So it is a very good bill of health. But was there any sort of things that were on the borderline of getting into being mentioned in the report that you decided against?
Yeah, I'd have to turn back to our file for that.
Yeah, okay.
It's been a few weeks since
Yeah.
I've looked at the detail.
Yeah.
I've looked at a lot of councils. in the
Yeah, I
last
can imagine
few
it's
weeks.
time of year, yeah.
But I'm certainly happy to
Yeah.
get back to it.
And generally the I guess the involvement and staff and the culture of the organisation.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, excellent. All right. I guess before going on to the recommendation, we do give the opportunity, we are given the opportunity to meet with the auditor while staff are not present. So I'll just request if any member would like to do that, just raise your hand. Otherwise, so we'll leave it with the committee members as whether they would like to do that.
Sorry, can you just say what it is then? That's
Sorry.
the first offer I've ever heard of that.
We have generally councils are given, well, the audit committee is given the opportunity to meet with the auditor without staff present, so that they can communicate anything. A lot of audit committees will do it, but it is, you are given that opportunity. So I just wanted to give members that opportunity now. You are different because you are recording your audit committee. It's a bit different to many other councils, but definitely you do have that opportunity. So if you do, I can request a staff leave and you can have a discussion with the auditor if you wish.
So my question, sorry, Michelle, to you again would be, under what time frame? So that can be at any point in time?
I could set an adjournment at this meeting, like we could just adjourn for 15 minutes.
That's what I've thought about before, so perhaps it's something that I'll mull over rather than
Okay.
rushing.
Yep.
Haven't actually thought through that option.
That's right.
Yes?
I think what we'll be prepared, I guess, then for next audit, that, yeah, just for members to understand they do have that prerogative. And I would always ask members if they would like to take up that opportunity. And not to be seen as negative, it's not a bad thing in the sense of that something's wrong. It just does give an opportunity that, you know, without staff present, the auditor can speak frankly. However, you'd assume anything of a problem would already be in the audit report anyway. But it is a practice that audit committees do. So given that no one's really wanting to do that at the moment, or we don't feel the need, I'm quite happy to move on. So if someone would like to move that motion of the recommendation, that's Councillor Bland, seconded by Councillor Taylor. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. So we're going to now move on to item 8, which is a report on the financial results as at 30th of June 2020. And so just for the committee, the recommendation that has been put forward by staff is that the Audit and Risk Committee advise Council that 1, it has reviewed and discussed the report for financial results for the year ending 30th of June 2020. 2, it has compared the variances to the adopted budget. And 3, consider the 1920 financial statements are reasonable and accurate. Does an officer wish to speak to this report? No. So is there any questions, statements from the members? Okay. Just, I guess, a couple of questions I have for this. I know on page 12, if we look at the net financial liabilities ratio, the adopted was at 16%. We are looking at the year end for 14%. But there's quite a large change to 25% is the adjusted. And for members, I think you're aware that adjusted is where we adjust for, you know, one-off variance type things and the financial assistance grant timings. I guess if there's further explanation of exactly what that 25% is made up of, or the difference between the 14 and the 25%.
Would you mind if I answer this one?
Go ahead.
Thanks, Rex.
Okay. Yeah, look, on the surface, it seems like a big swing, but I sort of, it's an area that's not really well understood by the sector. And back in 2018, the actual templates that were being used weren't correct. The templates have been adjusted now, and effectively, what you're looking at is a reported result of $2.3 million net financial liabilities. So your net financial liabilities are your total liabilities less your financial assets, which are basically your cash and your debtors. Okay, so if you look at that at the moment, and that's then your net financial liabilities are then divided by your operating revenue to determine a net financial liabilities ratio. But let's just focus on the net financial liabilities component to better understand why there's a variance. So 2.3 million is what it's calculated on the surface. However, included in that is a $1.6 million prepayment of financial assistance grants. Now, effectively, 2.3 million is what the council owes various different people once you take into account cash on hand and debtors. Okay, but if that includes $1.6 million that's been received in advance. Now, if that money hadn't been received in advance, council would have owed $3.9 million. So accordingly, $3.9 million divided by your operating result is going to give you a much larger percentage than $2.3 million by your operating result. And so that explains the reason for the large swing there. The other thing to note is that the operating surplus ratio doesn't vary by that much. And the reason being is that the net financial liabilities is a balance sheet type ratio, and balance sheets have an opening and closing balance that effectively look at balances across a number of periods. So accordingly, the prepayment that occurred in June 2019 is already reflected in the opening balance for cash that year. So what you need to understand is that the operating surplus ratio, that looks at a particular year. So that's looking at the transactions for a specific year. So in that instance, one amount was paid late and another amount was paid early. And so there's only a small variance between the size of the payment. So accordingly, that's why there isn't such a large movement in that ratio. So does that make sense?
We have nodding. So yep, thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. I'm just looking at my notes, sorry. Just a question on, I have page 14 in regards to the rate. The commentary says rates increased 3% and growth of 2.15. Growth is not budgeted as unknown at time of consultation and finalising the annual business plan. Sorry. I guess looking at a number of financial statements, budgets and budget versus actual, by the time we get to the point of 30th of June, or the timing of approving budget, I guess council does always adopt evaluation. So at that time of adopting evaluation, you do actually know the growth factor. And I guess I would suggest that maybe in the future, that does actually come get put into that one version of the business plan. Whether it doesn't, the fact that you talk about growth in public consultation is okay, and then to put final number based on that valuation into the annual business plan, so that you don't have this as a variance that happens on day one. Maybe more assistance to council in making kind of having that budget variation discussion. So it's just something I'd raise in the future.
Can I just make an observation on that one too, please?
Go ahead.
Sorry to be a pain, but I sort of did the maths there, and 96 grand's only a 1% above budget result. Have I messed that up, or is that correct?
That's correct. That is correct.
Okay, So yeah, I think I'm not sure what the comment in relation to the 3% and 2.15% is about. Is that perhaps in relation to the previous year's result? Because 1% is not 5.3%. So I don't think it's as big a variance as what it appears. Do you know where that comment came from, Judy?
Honestly, I'll have to take on notice, but honestly, my understanding is because we had a bigger rate cap,
You see, to me, we're explaining the movement in the budget, the variance from the adopted budget to the financial statements, and to me, it's not an overly large variance.
I'll just speak to that. I had made the assumption that it was saying that the rate increase of 3% plus growth is 2.15. Now the 2.15, I'm assuming was I would assume based on the valuation that you came closer to the time when you threw out consultation. And growth had changed between the time of consultation to the final amount that came through the rates of the final valuation adopted with council. So I guess from my point of view, in my questioning, it wasn't an issue of it not equaling 5%. It was that the growth factor was probably a little bit more that equated to the 96.
Yeah.
Plus, we know there are other items in there in regards to a reduction of interest and fines. So
there was
I guess that was
also,
nice.
there was also some the rebate given to motorsport is a lot higher than what we expected to. So based between 2018, 19, 2019, there was a bit of a massive, I just cannot remember the full figure from 18, 19. Motorsport did have a massive valuation increase last year.
So through you, Chair, we're looking at the timelines for next year so that we don't come into this problem again, so that we can have a cut-off that's earlier, so we can anticipate what the figures will be as we go into the budget process. Because now we leave it to the end of June.
Yep.
It's too tight.
And I guess the timings may change in the future with, the requirement maybe to report rate increases, optimizations before you approve them anyway. So I guess council's trying to maintain. Just an additional thing for myself in regards to the rate, and one thing I do look at, and I think it's definitely the audit committee also look at in general, is the how we do disclose rate increases to our community. Generally, while councils go through a routine of determining the rate revenue to make their organisation run, and they determine the percentage increase in rate revenue that they need over the previous year. And that is probably the main disclosure I think community needs to see of how much more money council needs to run. Now there may be factors. We know growth is the increase in our community, and so therefore we are required to provide more services, and we should think about that. But I often find councils can play with the way they talk to the community in regards to their rate increases, especially when there's a focus on the rate in the dollar. And sometimes I see the rate in the dollar as a good comparison to other councils in regards to valuation of property, but it is purely the way we distribute tax. So that definitely the audit committee gets a chance to discuss how that rate increase is going to be communicated within your own business plan. So it will be something I'll raise in the committee when the business plan comes to us to have a discussion of how this council chooses to communicate its rate increases to the community. So it's just a factor I think it's worth discussing. Another one in regards to page 12, page 14. And it's good to actually with the auditors, because I might get this feedback on as well, is the gain loss disposal. And I guess council, a lot of councils see this issue that when they replace road infrastructure, they are getting quite large write-offs through this item of loss on disposal, because it's the value left in the road when it's replaced. I generally would say that by the time you replace the road, you would be doing so on the basis that it's used up. And so if we have depreciation left over and we're getting these losses on disposal, it means we haven't depreciated enough or we're replacing the road earlier than what our service levels are saying we should be. And in a way, rather than depreciation on the top of our operating statement, which gets reported in our financial ratios, it's ending up in the bottom line underneath. And I do see this, and I was saying it's $1.5 million is effectively hasn't seen itself in our operating statement depreciation, and now we're writing it off. So it's a concern. And I had a quick discussion with staff to say, I think we should start looking into those numbers. So just communicating that to the rest of the members. But maybe the auditor would like to comment on that sort of number of what that is. And I don't know if members would like a further explanation of what that number means.
I would appreciate it.
Yep. I'll leave that one with you, David.
Yeah, I mean, and the composition of the exact number that the discussion for later, we can unpack it. But effectively, I think you're right. It's a result of, well, I mean, depreciation is an assumption at the end of the day. So we just have to keep that in mind no matter what we do. But one of the reasons we've been raising the need for regular recurring and current valuations is to help address this issue. Because if it, let's say it's a condition issue, which it most likely will be of some sort, that would be brought to the fore through regular recurring valuations. And now seeing, back to my comment earlier on, that you're on a defined valuation schedule, that will certainly help these issues, or it should take the magnitude of the wildfire from just unexpected use or discrepancies in use. That really should take her off. But I dare say this is potentially a result of the lengthy valuation times in between one point to the other. With that, the desktop probably only looking at unit rates rather than actual condition assessments themselves. So yeah, it certainly concurs with your comment.
So just a question where we've had a lot of grants recently in relation to the number of assets that probably were opportunistic for taking that money, I would say, for it, and dealing with it. It would not have had the opportunity, or would be slightly premature, or with new assets. How will that affect this figure?
That will depend on how well you depreciate. If you're depreciating in accordance with its actual consumption, then you shouldn't have these big lump sums at the end of the day. It should be well structured and planned over the life of the asset, depending on the asset, 20 to 150 years, whatever it might be. It's roads obviously a little longer depending on the component. So it really does come down to your ability to manage condition and reflect that through your everyday depreciation.
Can I please have a bit of a say on this one too?
You may go through the tabs.
Okay. Yeah, those who've been on committee for a while will realise I've been probably bringing this issue up for a couple of years now. And one of the actions that you'll see in the work program, I think it's item 7.4, is a comprehensive depreciation review. Because I've got serious concerns about the accuracy of the data and the assumptions used to calculate the depreciation charge. And those of you that have been around for a bit will realise it's not the first time I've said that. So accordingly, that item 7.4 was built into the work program to specifically address the issue that you've raised today, Michelle. So that's all I wanted to point out, is that that's why that's an important action within the work program that needs to be actioned by staff, and it's not something that'll take a week or two to do. It's quite a very involved process. So accordingly, I think that's why the due date's pushed out a fair way. But it's something that I believe the Director of Infrastructure and Assets needs to take on board and work with finance, and then and basically make sure that our depreciation charge isn't overstated, because that's my fear at the moment, is that it might be overstated. And of course, if it is, well, that means your operating result has been adversely affected. Vice versa though, if it's understated, or alternatively, we might be replacing roads too soon. If let's say the data is accurate, that would indicate those roads that were resheeted shouldn't have been resheeted because they still had remaining useful life. And so accordingly, that needs to be taken into account as well. So it's, as Michelle said, it's one or the other, and it needs to be addressed. And given that you've got such a sophisticated asset data system and ASCETIC looking after it, I believe it should be something that council's able to get right moving forward.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, we've all been pretty consistent in regards to do have an updated revaluation, but also an asset management plan that is reflected in your depreciation rates and in your financial statements as well. I think, and it sounds like your council is heading towards a level of maturity that is improving that. But definitely the audit committee needs to stay abreast of that. And I guess that's one thing I would suggest to staff in the future. I don't know in regards to evaluation, but I think it is worth the audit committee looking over the more detailed valuation information as part of the valuation processes. We do then get to review the unit rates, the service level assumptions, the I guess the overall effect on valuation, and also the effect on depreciation. Because you must remember when we depreciate assets, when we revalue assets, we also reassess those depreciation rates, and we get to decide if they're too high or too low. And so when we see those 1.5 million, we can question that and make sure staff are using that in those assumptions. And also that this valuation data is not just coming from a valuer, who's going off valuing it and then handing it down to the council and just going with it. You want an interaction between staff and valuers in regards to the development of these numbers. So I would definitely request that in future we do see the valuation information into COVA to get an idea of how the effect it's going to have and that it's appropriate and it's meant to be the right process for the review within the organisation. That's just a suggestion. I'm happy to put that in motion, but it would be good to hear that information. Sorry, just one final question. We do see that we've had a revaluation in those numbers. A quick question in regards to depreciation expense. Again, when we have revaluation, depreciation expense changes. So I was just wondering, is that revaluation information available and has that been factored into the annual business plan, or would that come out of the budget? It's coming through as budget review. So that's something to watch, I guess, especially from a council perspective, that may be a large change. I'm unsure at the moment of the depreciation expense amount. Maybe it's not, but yeah, it may affect on future budget review of the council. And that's why it is so important that the revaluations that do have a lot of effect on council's numbers. And you think depreciation effectively will affects rate setting in regards to how much rate revenue you need to collect to make sure that you're operating in a balanced position. Okay, I think we have done item 8. Would someone like to put forward, now it's in 3 parts, that recommendation? I'll just revisit it, that the Audit and Risk Committee advised council that 1 is to review and discuss the report for financial results for year ending June 2020. So we actually doing the financial statements. Sorry. Yeah, I'll just looking at the item 3 because we're actually determining that the financial statements at this point are reasonable and accurate. So that's in the next one. Okay. So I'm going to take part 3 out of that recommendation. So if someone would like to put that motion forward, that the Audit and Risk Committee by council that is review and discuss a report for financial results for year ending June 2020, and it has compared the variances to the adopted budget. Stop. Thank you for that, Councillor Blanche. Someone like to second it? Councillor Hill. All those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. We are now up to item 9, which is the financial statement certification report independent. Just for the committee, the recommendation forward by staff is that the Audit and Risk Committee endorses the presiding member of the Audit and Risk Committee and the Chief Executive Officer to sign the certification of audit for independence for inclusion within the annual financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2020. Anyone wish to talk to the report at all? Sorry. process. Would someone like to move that motion? Thank you again, Councillor Blair. Put forward the motion. Who would like to second that? Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Okay, so now we get to the actual financial statements themselves. Item 10, draft financial statements for year end date 30th June 2020 and audit report. So we had considered the audit report in the previous item, ago. Just so the members are aware, the recommendation here for high staff is that the audit and risk committee advise council that it has reviewed and discussed the 1920 financial statements with the auditor and believe they represent a true and fair report of council's finances for the year ending 30th of June 2020. Okay, is there any answer question? No. Okay, members, is there any question?
There's a question in relation to accrued annual leave. I guess there is a plan in place to increase that process so that it allows.
Yes. Councillor Bain, you're correct. COVID put a little dampener on that because we encouraging people to have leave. COVID was a little difficult, but we're certainly keeping a close eye on each of those allowances, making sure that staff don't have anything undue. It's, as you would imagine, a little tricky in an organisation our size. Some staff have got quite large balances outstanding, but we're working through that with individuals so that we can get to a more reasonable spot. That may still take us some time.
So my question, following on from that through the chair, is that given that we have a number of vacancies over that period of time, my question is around the compounded problem, and in 12 months we'll still see that out, given that there's a lot of action.
The future, yes. As you understand, Councillor Glenn, we have filled most of those vacancies now. There's probably still one or two. We're not certain that we want to fill some of those. We have some outdoor staff vacancies that we've had trouble filling, and we're looking at alternate ways of doing that. So vacancies are certainly high on the agenda. But the key positions that we want to fill from last year's vacancies we have, and the ones in the outdoor staff have come about this year or late last year, and we're in the process of filling those now. So,
we're also in the process and have been for quite some time now in training other staff to back up staff to go on leave. So previously there were no backups of staff, so staff would go on leave, come back, and there's a pile of work. So we're now training and kind of doing career path people as well. So when someone goes away, the wheels keep turning for the backup staff.
Any other questions, comments? I guess the format at the moment, we've got a draft format, and just wondering, it looks like there still will be minor edits and those sorts of things to be done to the document. Is that correct?
Basically, it's just find the zeros, just taking the numbers with it.
Right. So I guess a couple of things. Now, I think the officer touched on it before, but page 11 of the statement. There was a large drop in discretionary rebates, remissions, and write-offs.
Yeah. Okay. Basically, with the spreadsheet that we use for financials, the coding was incorrect. So some of this mandatory is actually not mandatory. It belongs under this discretionary. That's why there was a bigger gap in between the comparison. I'll speak with David afterwards, but and the other one is because the modes will also increase, which increased this last year's figure as opposed to the year before. So there was that split variation that is coming into effect when we did the audit this time. So we're just going to check whether everybody wants to correct last year or whether just leave it as it is.
I'd suggest materiality might be one there. Probably not.
There's low value in going through the grey area.
So just for clarification, you're saying that 2,960,000, something was supposed to be 60% of the parks.
Yes.
But with the coding issue that I discussed.
Okay, but I guess overall then what we've got is about an $85,000 increase in rebates, however.
Which is motorsport mostly. There's also, we had a lot of discretionary rebates made when we did the rebate review. Like 18, 19 to
Okay, so council take on trying to approval process and get discretionary rebates. Okay. And so you've enhanced the number of discretionary rebates. And was that was, I guess, part of the business plan as well. So there was community consultation in regards to that.
which
That'd be very
but
good
then
feedback.
we got them, we sent out a lot of documentations, the ones who already had it, have to reapply and some new ones.
Some of that was done.
Yeah.
Where we found the block.
Okay.
You know, there were a number of them.
No, it's good, and council should be regularly reviewing their discretionary rebates. And I guess the rest of the community do pay for discretionary rebates. They wear the burden of it. So it's definitely good communication for the rest of the community. Notice page 11, commercial activity revenue, charges. It says commercial activity revenue 1. I'm assuming that one should be the 4, yeah, that was a format thing that we would say were not. Another quick question, capitalised employee costs. And this can have quite a big impact. Again, you know, we measure council performance by your operating surplus deficit. And when you take a large portion of your wages and capitalise it into the balance sheet, it's no longer there, but it's still an ongoing expense you have every year. And I noticed there's quite a big move this year, so I'm assuming there are a lot of capital works and staff are working on it outside. Do you have a sense amount in budget in your business plan for capitalised wages?
It was around previously 2023 was about 200,000-300,000. Yeah. Last year for this current financial year we budgeted for about 500. So it is a
So through you, Chair, we looked at the capitalisation and staff involved, and we had a fairly conservative approach in prior years. So we looked at the program works almost individually and had a look at what would make sense from capital. So although it's still conservative, probably.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess it's something we can monitor through the long-term financial plan and see how much is going into that capital work. Again, because if it's not in your operating statement, it's fine if it's a long-term thing, but you just don't want to be seeing that sort of, I guess, reduction of operating deficit or operating result because it is in capital. And it's something we'll just look over in regards to how much is being allocated to make sure it's fully substantiated.
Can I just provide a bit more detail in relation to that one?
You may.
Yeah, okay, just to let you know, Michelle, as part of the budget setting process, we've got a zero-based staff list. And so that works out exactly what each staff member gets paid throughout the year, as well as their on costs. And then at the end of it, we've got 2 columns, one for operating and one for capital. So the executive leadership team met and went through and discussed with the Director of Infrastructure Assets who was going to be working on what capital projects and then what likely percentage of their time was going to be spent on those projects. And so as Judy pointed out, we've got a figure of $500,000 there, but we can actually tie that back to which individuals we're expected at this stage. And we're going to review as part of the budget reviews to see that, you know, that is actually a fair assumption. But at this stage, we've got a very detailed list of staff that add up to that $500,000 we expect to be capitalised into infrastructure construction and managing projects. So, yeah, just for a little bit more detail on it.
I guess the concern I have in organisations is as long as in the long-term planning, council understands how those wages are distributed between capital and operating. And then in the long term, if you're also going through especially capital intensive few years, you have to understand that if your outside workforce are being used on those capital works, in future they may not. So as long as you are, looking in your long-term view and saying, actually, that's about the standard level of capital, we're okay to continually allocate that much of our wages into the balance sheet rather than operating result. But knowing that when that capital may peter off, you have to wear it and you have to be able to cover it in your operating statement by way
Can I just speak on that as well?
yeah, go.
I agree fully with what you're saying there. Just a little bit more background. I think the capital budget was somewhere around 9 million, so it's not a big component of the overall spend. But from what I understand, and I'll stand corrected if this isn't right, but council also use contractors to do their resheeting and resealing, and so accordingly, I believe that the issue about having excess staff in perhaps years where we haven't got the same level of renewals might not be such an issue, because what logically would happen is the contractors would get wound back first. But I do think that's a valid point.
And that's exactly the answer you want to hear. That if you are, that your organisation is, looking into it and managing that. So that's great to hear.
But just sorry, shares around that, should there not be a note then somewhere where we've had to do that because of significant capital work, but whether we use contractors for handling staff and having a continuous note on that? Council is not always on this committee, always here and change, and some of the stuff goes over years.
I guess
why I'm ensuring the note goes to that effect, particularly that one.
I think we need to understand what the financial statements are doing, and that's probably not the role of the financial statements in this aspect. There is a note that does disclose how much has been capitalised. It is something councils can do as part, I think it is set out in the financial statements as an item. Some councils don't do it, I know a few. But definitely in regards to the development of your budget, the long-term financial planning and reporting, yes, I think it's important that councillors are made aware of the impact on that number and how it's been considered. So yeah, I would definitely suggest that that gets taken on board, and that's why I guess I suggested as well that it is something that needs to be discussed and understood. I'm sure staff will take that on board, but we'll make sure when we're looking at your next plan, but also your budget review process, we can look at how much has been capitalised in the budget.
It should also form part of your asset management strategy and be articulated in your asset management plan, the fact that you're using a combination of contractors and staff. So that's probably another area you'd discuss these types of issues.
Thank you. Okay. I did just a question, and this is probably a little for the auditor. I noticed in the asset note on page 22. Under the infrastructure with the valuation, the detail of how the valuation is provided, I was a bit confused with the note because I sort of assumed it was telling me what valuation came at, what the worth of the valuation was, but I think it was actually communicating the movement of the valuation.
So the net result of the value was.
Yeah. Is that normal in regards to notes?
To disclose that level of detail.
Yeah.
I don't always see it, but as long as, from our perspective, as long as it's an accurate representation of what's happening, you can disclose anything you want, whatever level of detail that you want.
Yes,
Yeah. So we're comfortable that it's telling the right story. It's whether or not you want to tell the story in that depth is your choice.
Yeah. And I guess the assumption is it wouldn't be there next year. Yeah, it's just in the current year, isn't it? I guess I felt the wording that said unsealed road transportation assets are valued by blah, 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 at depreciated current replacement cost during the reporting period ended 30th of June as follows. So I was actually looking at seeing the total replacement cost with that wording, not the movement. So I guess that was the only thing I thought it was a bit confusing. Because then I looked and I thought, well, that's not going to be balance sheet. You know, so I guess if I'm raising that as a question, maybe the wording might need tweaking, but I don't know how far you're on the financial statement. So I'll page 23, $500,000 of prepayments. So I guess just a bit more of an explanation. Payments in advance, actually, sorry. Yeah, so you have 500,000 in your payments received in advance. Is that grant?
Yeah, but it's 97 is grant.
Okay.
Or 91%.
Yeah.
No, that is about $20,000 is actually for leasing.
Right. So I guess then my question, another chance for any other members? Okay. So this was item 10. So the recommendation is the Audit and Risk Committee advise council that it's reviewed and discussed the 1920 financial statements with the auditor and believe they represent a true and fair report of council's finances for the year ending 30th of June 2020. Someone like to move that? Please. Thank you, Councillor Bland. Would someone like to second that? Thank you, Councillor Hill. Vote on that, we'll go some paper. That passed. Then. Page. Oh, that's got a lot. Okay, we're on item 11, the Audit and Risk Committee performance report. So the recommendation here is that the Audit and Risk Committee recommends to Council that the Audit and Risk Committee performance report be ratified and included in Council's annual report for 2019-20. Is there any questions, anything that members would like to change for those who were at those meetings with those decisions?
Members are that you noted that it took down from that committee.
Okay. Everyone do that? No. I guess I just had a question in the statement on page 27. It says all council members are invited to attend each meeting. I just wondered if we need to specify their status in the meeting, that they were invited as, you know, observers, you know, observe from rather than a voting side. The family thought to myself, oh, I'm voting. So, and I would also suggest that I noticed that some of the, when I did look back at the meetings and looked at the decisions that were put forward, the dot points under key activities of the Audit and Risk Committee were a bit different to the actual way the decisions were, I guess, documented. So, what did I say? The second to last point. Rather than said made a recommendation, I'll change the wording to recommended to council. That are more aggressive, so wherever we see recommendation. And I believe they reviewed and discussed the draft of the 2021 annual business plan and budget. I believe that was actually recommended for adoption in regards. So I just advise staff to maybe go back to the specific wording of the motions that the committee put forward and use the either the exact wording or something that's closer to what the decisions were. Yeah, and even the reviewed and received council's long-term financial plan, I believe that had a recommendation for public consultation. So that's all I'd ask. So I think we might redraft that motion to make sure that occurs. Would someone like to put that motion forward? If not, I'm happy as the providing member to put something, the motion forward.
With the adjustment you're asking,
Yeah.
you can make the adjustment and then it moves.
Yeah. Okay. So if we look at the, I'm reading it, sorry. Let's say that the Audit and Risk Committee recommends to Council that the Audit and Risk Committee performance report be ratified and included in Council's annual report for 1920 with amendments and with the following amendments. And we'll just try the number of dot points, I guess.
You start with scheduled meetings. Is there a amendment scheduled meetings? So he was actually a member of this.
So amendment of the scheduled meetings. That was to highlight that the mayor just like, you're happy with that one? Actually, no, I think we will do that. That's right, yeah. To show that the mayor stood down. And you may want to put some on beforehand because it's above the status of council members, of non-committee council members attending meetings. And then in the section, the activities of the Audit Risk Committee, to reflect. Yeah. The committee.
Sorry.
Then you might have to call a recommendation. Okay, would someone like to put that forward? Thank you, Councillor Gill. Second to that. Thank you, Councillor Bland. All those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Okay, thank you. Now we are up to item 12, credit card report to the executive officer. And the recommendation by the staff is that the Audit Risk Committee receive and note the Chief Executive Officer's credit card report to 31st of August 2020. And I guess just for my information, I note that this comes from a recommendation of the Auditor General, a report in March 2020, that this committee review the CEO's credit card transactions at each meeting. Does an officer wish to talk to you? No.
It's not mature.
So normally this, do council get this report normally as well? Yep. Okay. So the Auditor General sent to the Audit Committee.
Yeah, through you. This is the first report and the recommendation was to the audit committee, so it'll be about this.
I mean, look at that for a while. I mean, most councils probably see it as just, part of the council reports. But we quite agree with this to take on that role. If the Auditor General requested. And what an exciting lucky leg.
Is that like you said that $18 has got a very long story.
I know, I did say I was two transactions and then there was an audit error. All those accounting entries processing, so that's one day. So would someone like to put that motion forward? Councillor Taylor. you. Would someone like to second that? Councillor Bland, thank you. And we will vote. All those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Now we move on to item 3, the draft risk framework communications plan and the revised management policy. Officer.
Through you, Chair, I'll let the director chime in, but this is a policy that has been a long time coming. We had bits and pieces of it over the last few years, and the work of Bob in the background there to put it all together to have a proper risk management framework and policy has been a tremendous amount of work over the last 12 months. It's one of those silver linings from COVID as well that gave us a bit of a hurry up to make sure that our processes and frameworks were in place, and this is the result of that. So,
Any questions, comments from members? Right, it's a good document. And it is interesting to watch councils move through their risk management maturity. So, you know, these are the first steps. So, as an audit and risk committee, we definitely need to be watching this space and be looking at, you know, more reporting information coming to this committee. And it definitely, as we see, especially with local government reform going through, that audit committees and are now called audit and risk committees generally because that impact of risk, and it's not just the financials and the financial sustainability that should be our focus. It is that overall corporate risk.
So it's a joy expectation. And so if we were in this meeting, maybe the week after COVID, in the emergency, you would see a report about the risk and our associated work done with that.
Yes, yeah. I guess, and just to comment on that, as the audit and risk committee, it is about understanding those emerging risks that are coming about, and then understanding exactly what they're doing in regards to those mitigation plans, or that they've actually analysed those risks and looked at the way council's approaching it, and whether they want to integrate that or not. And it's it's that ongoing focus. So it's a bit like work health and safety. It's something that we should be looking at every meeting and really making sure that council's on top of that risk register, both from strategic corporate levels to the very detailed operation. We may not look into the operational, but make sure we're making sure there's processes and that the organisation is working in the culture of monitoring and thinking about risk at every point. So that'll generally be a changing practice. Councillor Taylor?
That's really Chair. Will the risk register be coming to the council?
Through you, Chair. Where I'm working with Rob on that for a little while now to fine tune it and make it an actual genuine document rather than just tick some boxes. So we'll be working on the next 6 or so weeks, even I would say December, get that to council as the strategic risk register and then the operation. So we've worked on the strategic, there's been some training. So we're just kind of fine tuning it as we did with this. There was a lot of work involved with this to make it not just shops and just say, oh yeah, we tick that box. We actually want to make it working documents.
Through you, Chair, the council, with that time frame in mind, we can bring the strategic research to the audit committee.
Yep.
And then probably to the January, February ordinary meeting council.
As for the Chair, a lot of this mentioned in this document of continuous improvement. Will that include the lessons learned? So, as continuous improvement. So if something is found to be ineffective or inappropriate or whatever, the lessons will be learned and highlighted to council.
Through you, Chair. We certainly take continuous improvement very seriously. That's kind of our mantra here now. And we'll review and maintain anything that comes up that we can potentially improve on. And then anything of significance, we can certainly bring up to council to provide explanation and kind of brag.
Through you, Chair, and council, you've seen some of those things already in terms of one-offs that we put in the info doc, and we continue to do that so that council is aware that that continuous focus continuous improvement focus is there for whatever we do, whether it's renewing the contract or just finding a better way of doing things.
And I guess from my perspective, hearing that and hearing the words of lessons to learn, it's good to hear that it's not a blame culture where people are afraid of finding problems and communicating risk and figuring out plans of how to mitigate those risks. I think if you've got a culture that, you know, staff and everyone is willing to come forward and highlight issues and problems, I think that's great to hear. Because it's something that audit committees probably don't think about enough, and that is ultimately everything we look at comes from a frame of culture and organisation. So we need to hear that there is a good culture, and that when there are mistakes, they're going to be communicated and they are treated appropriately. You know, it's about continuous improvement and finding out how to fix it. Otherwise, people won't come forward. You know, we move to the blame culture. Councillor Glenn.
What that says to me a little bit too, we had a review some time back in relation to culture, and at some point in time, that's a one-off. We probably need to consider whether that actually is that culture again. We see that there has been some continuous improvement, or we have some evidence of some of that. How do we counsel then that culture has improved, and we would want to see that we actually look continuous cultural improvement as well. So I'm trying to very much in the
You're correct, Councillor Bain, and one of the things that contributes fairly significantly to the culture of the organisation is the performance assessment programs, and we've started almost from scratch from that. So I agree thoroughly that we will need to have a staff engagement, staff cultural review, but I would think that maybe another 6 months before we think about what that looks like, because I think there's a lot of groundwork that has to be done first. We could have done it the other way and did it as a benchmark, I suppose. I'm not sure if that cultural review that was done a couple of years ago was done in its broadest sense. It was for a specific purpose at a specific point in time. And I would be concerned about using it as a benchmark, but we're still working through what the best process is for that.
I think small organisations do cause some issues around open communication.
Councillor Taylor.
Through your chat, for the risk register itself, is there what level of contingency is included in that risk register? Is that for all risks or just extreme or high?
We through you, Chair, sorry. We look at all risk and then assess accordingly and comment accordingly as to what could or should be put in place to improve any risk found if it's low. If there can be an improvement, we'll comment.
And this is a driver as well for succession planning.
So driver for succession planning.
So that having looked at or having recently visited a risk management framework, you've implemented succession planning for particular staff when they're not here for it. Is that the driver for doing that?
No, that wasn't the driver. It's kind of like the through the big picture, I guess, of every angle we're looking at. But that they do kind of connect.
Yeah.
It all kind of works
I
together.
think so. You're saying that if the risk register is not complete and it wasn't a factor on it, but you would assume that it would become on the risk register when it's developed.
Yeah.
Through your chair, Councillor, the risk register, a risk may be identified, and then we may accept that risk. And there's no mitigation around it, but it's about the documentation then about the identification and the acceptance of it. So it could be because it's immaterial or the likelihood of it happening is fairly low, but it's more about the identification and then what you decide to do with that next. And the succession planning, we may not have thought of putting that from a risk perspective, but it certainly fits there very nicely.
I've passed on just some edit points to the staff. I won't go through those. But I'm not sure other members may be aware of it, but I was just wondering what's the process, what's the history of what you've gone through in regards to risk management here? That sort of it's something that you've kind of really to really concentrate over a period. And I guess how did this documentation come together in regards to council and staff?
Yeah, through you, Chair. was kind of acknowledged that we were lacking in this area. So we certainly dedicated some time to make sure we get this up and working. Rob has been working on this for quite some months now to get it to where we want it to be. As I said, taking it seriously. So it was just the flag that we felt we weren't up there with what was required.
And the involvement of other staff and council so far, what's happened there?
We've had, Rob, would you like to speak to the training we've had around the framework?
So,
Rob, can I just get you the microphone? Sorry, the
yeah. So part of the process has been working with the local government risk management services. So been using their expertise, looking at they've got some templates and things. So we've sort of pulled those together and sort of come up with what we want to use. So we've done that with the executive leadership team and executive management. So we've done some training on risk management and so forth. The lead councillors have had some training with risk management, but we've also put that in our communications plan is to make sure there are any gaps to close those. And I guess it's pulling, we did have a risk policy, but it's putting the lines underneath that and the policy is really a commitment, having lines how we are doing, setting some standards, I guess, and culture in regards to risk and across the organisation, making sure that everyone is thinking about things like that, when they do projects where value for money, longevity, and all that sort of stuff. And things like COVID, it's a whole new risk level that has to do with this year. So.
So through you, Chair, just one other thing, you mentioned the occupational health and safety. We have that as a standing item on our executive leadership team once a week, and we examine the results, probably reports on those once a week to see what incidents staff have been involved in, can we do it better? Is there something we need to change in terms of the safety of staff? So they're ongoing conversations that we have now also with the organisation.
I guess I noticed when I look at your agenda items that you're having risk factors standard on your agenda with some reports to council as well. So they're always contemplating the risk associated with the report to them. Is I guess another standard recurrent one we see. Just a few questions. Like I said, I think I'll pass on just some general edit things. Page 1213 of the framework document. I just noticed that inside of the document, when we look at 5.22, define the context, pressures and risks and opportunities. I guess it became very specific, and I just wondered if it belongs in this document or sort of the next layer of document when you start talking about the risk register and those sorts of things, given that you'd assume a framework wouldn't be renewed as often as the underlying concepts and the looking at things. So I just wondered if that might hold you back a little bit by having so much content in that document. Maybe pull it out and put it somewhere else. And these are just suggestions. With anything from the audit committee, I understand, especially with independent members, this is your document, so I'll only ever talk suggestions. So unless it's something that I do will actually affect the organisation. Yeah, so that was maybe a bit. Sorry, just looking at the rest of it. And also just talking about the risk categories you see in those consequence tables and all the rest of it, maybe a bit of an explanation about what the categories are. And I know this is pretty much a standard document, I've seen this a few times.
We actually, sorry, we did actually review this and relook at it.
Yeah.
Make sure it works with everything else.
Yeah.
In council.
Yeah.
It's not its own.
Yeah, no, yeah, I can see that, that
Yeah.
everything worked. Yeah, but just kind of maybe some explanation of what you see those categories being, you know, when we talk about political and, you know, those, financial risk, what implications. So I guess that was the issue. Yep, that's the one, the consequence table. So it's across the top of the consequence table there, the categories that I was talking about. About that. Yeah. Page 24. Yeah, and the rest were just minor edits. Okay. All right. Sorry, go back to the recommendation, which is in front of me. Just in regards to the wording, we just take out the resolve too, because I believe we are moving that the Audit Risk Committee recommends that council adopt, not resolve to adopt. The adoption is the resolving. So, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so would someone like to put that motion forward? Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Seconded by Councillor Hill. All those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Other business. 14. I guess this is where I like to just give an opportunity to the CEO to brief the Audit Committee on any emerging issues, anything that's not in a report yet, but maybe in future months, or anything we should be considering. And again, this is when we do come from that risk point of view. We're not just talking financial, we're talking about just things the council is currently negotiating with or dealing with. So I'd just like to open it up for the CEO.
Given it's Tuesday and it's the federal budget day, it's probably the thing that's first and foremost in our minds about what does it mean for our district. The thing that I think the leak that come out now with budgets more than past years was the focus on apprentices. I think there's an opportunity for us, and I mentioned earlier that we have trouble with some AFL staff. I think we may have to grow your own in some of those areas. And from I suppose, an operational perspective, I think having apprentices and traineeships in an organisation is a good thing to do. So when you'll remember back to when we set the budget for this year, we had put aside some money in the possibility of using it for that very purpose. So I think we're well placed for that. The other thing I think that is occupying my time, I think I mentioned it in the reverse when at the last audit committee with COVID just starting, not really understanding what it might mean to the district, but our district in a sense has probably weathered very well, and I think the shortage of staff for organisations is going to be the issue, not that we will have an abundance of unemployed people. Youth are probably a little different from that, and that's no different to the rest of the country, but the industries that we have here, possibly apart from the ones related to the tourist industry, the B&Bs, who are now all bumping along again quite well. So they would have had a short-term hiccup in their cash flows, and that may or may not have a long-term impact, depending, I suppose, on the business, each individual business. But I think the finding of staff will be more of an issue for us than the unemployment of people across our district, which brings with it specific challenges. So we're starting to look at what is the risks that we have around our casual staff, and we do have casuals in some places, particularly in the outdoors area. Is it better that we go, and we're doing some numbers now, to a contracting arrangement, or looking about permanent staff who have other functions as well? And it goes back to the Chair's comment that we have to be careful because sometimes you'll run out of work if you've got permanent staff, but what are the risks associated with that? So we're doing a fair bit of work around what is the best model for some of the work that we have to do, particularly in our outdoor areas. If you think about on-call, the bin collections, the cleaning of public toilets, those types of things. We've in the past used casual staff. That is problematic in many ways. So, and I think COVID is not going to improve the situation in terms of availability of people across the district. I think, as I said, this district will have the reverse impact, because from a farming perspective, quite a good year.
Just a question, if I might, through
Sure.
to our CEO, and that is in relation to the work from home potential from here and the impacts that you see that may have, both on the organisation, individuals, and connectivity, but also around IT and communication, and potential to bring people out from the city.
So I think working from home is a great opportunity for an organisation our size and for our location. And there are some positions that can work quite comfortably from home. I think that we're coming to a realisation that people like a mix of things, and so with the COVID, and I'll use that example, still the emergency is still declared. We still have the capacity for staff to work from home, and we have now quite a fluid arrangement, particularly with the indoor staff. Outdoor staff are a completely different story, but indoor staff have quite a fluid arrangement now about talking with their manager or supervisor about days that they may work from home if they've got a special project to do or something like that. The IT now is quite sufficient for us. We Zoom our meetings, we bring our outdoor staff into our Zoom meetings, so we have a true all of staff meeting rather than just outside staff. And I think our IT is perfectly capable now. The area where we have the most difficulty is still in this chamber in terms of Zoom meetings, and the audio is particularly troublesome without us spending a bit of money on it. But staff have embraced the working from home. Productivity hasn't changed at all. It's forced us to look at some of our processes, and back to Councillor Taylor's comment about the efficiencies. It has forced us to look at them rather quickly. So again, that was a silver lining from COVID's perspective for us. And I think it'll be something not just this organisation, but organisations across Australia will embrace over the next coming years. So does that answer your question, Councillor Blaine?
Yes, I was just looking at, and also some of the risks that may come with that. But obviously you've covered off on some of that. So, and my follow-up question on that is just to support your comments about apprenticeships and grow your own in support for the youth of the district and coming along. We've certainly seen that in the past, that some of those staff did stay in the organisation, and I think some of the grow your own is an opportunity for the youth to keep them in the district longer, but also they then often move on to bigger and better things in the future. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that.
So I don't mind when people move on, because if they're going to bigger and brighter things, I think we've done our job well. So.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're coming to the end of our meeting. Do we talk to the next meeting before we close the meeting?
It's just there for
Okay, all right.
But we'll just, yep, that first item is actually in this report.
Okay, yeah, report on the financial report won't be in that. And just to note that the 2nd of February meeting, I believe, will also be looking at the community plan and the asset management plan as well. Well, if there are no other business, I would declare the meeting closed. Yeah, yes,
Well
planned
done.
that well. It is 11:30. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. 11:32. Sorry.
Thanks, everybody. Catch you all later.
Anyway, see ya. Oh, yes, yeah.
I'll go and change it right now. Go do that. Right. Yeah.
Thanks for me. How long have you got?
Yes.
Are you?
Yeah.
Are you? Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Is there something else? do this here or?
Yeah, we got,
Not yet, Mike.
Oh, okay.
We should have a reading.
It's.
Um,